One of the most frequently asked questions I receive is, how can I add inclusions like olives or jalapeños and cheddar or dried cranberries and walnuts to my sourdough bread recipe? Today, I'm going to show you how I do it via this loaf of rosemary-olive sourdough bread. To start, stir 12 grams of salt into 375 grams of water. Add 100 grams of active, bubbly sourdough starter and stir to combine. To this, add 500 grams of bread flour and stir until you have a wet, sticky dough ball. Cover the bowl and let the dough rest for 30 minutes. Using a wet hand, stretch and fold the dough. As you stretch and fold the dough, you should feel it transform from being shaggy with maybe some bits of dried flour that haven't quite been incorporated into the dough yet to being smooth and elastic. I find doing some slap and folds really helps the dough come together into a cohesive ball. Cover the bowl and let the dough rest for 1 hour. Drizzle some oil around the perimeter of the dough and lightly oil a work surface as well. Using a flexible bench scraper if you have one, or your hands if you don't, gently turn the dough out onto your work surface. Then spread the dough into a large rectangle. If the dough is sticking to your hands, you can lightly oil them. You want the dough to be pretty thin, and it should be roughly 14 to 15 inches by 18 to 20 inches in size. For this recipe, you need 5 ounces of olives total, but here you're going to spread 4 ounces of them over the dough. Here, I'm using a mix of Castelvetrano and Kalamata olives, but you can really use any variety of olives that you like. Spread roughly 1.5 tablespoons of chopped fresh rosemary over the dough, reserving half a tablespoon for the next step. Gently press the olives and rosemary into the dough. Then fold the dough envelope style. Sprinkle the remaining olives and rosemary over the bottom 2/3 of the dough. Fold the dough envelope style again, starting with the top edge. Transfer the dough back to the bowl, cover the bowl, and let the dough rest for 1 more hour. At this point, you can either stretch and fold the dough as we did earlier, or you can do a sort of coil fold by gently lifting the dough up and letting the edges fold onto themselves underneath and folding the dough in half several times. Honestly, I don't even really know what I do at this phase. I just try to get the dough into a rough ball before transferring it to my vessel to complete its bulk fermentation. Drizzle the dough lightly with olive oil and turn it to coat. Then cover the vessel and let the dough rise until it has increased in volume by roughly 50 to 75%. When the dough is ready, turn it out onto a work surface. I like to do this pre-shape without any flour, but if you find the dough to be too sticky, you can absolutely use flour as needed. Shape the dough into a rough ball. You can do this with a metal bench scraper, as I'm doing here, or you can use your hands if you find that to be easier. Sprinkle your work surface lightly with flour if you haven't done so already. Then turn the dough smooth side down and let the dough rest for roughly 30 to 60 minutes. When the dough is ready, shape it as you wish. I love shaping this style of sourdough bread into a batard as opposed to a boule because I find I consistently get a more open crumb with the batard shape. Here, I'm just trying to create a little bit more tension. I'm using floured hands and I'm dragging and pushing and pulling the bread in both directions. Line a banneton with a flour sack towel. I find with these flour sack towels, I don't need to sprinkle rice flour or any additional flour into the towel. Place your loaf seam side up in your banneton. Then, using lightly floured hands, try to pinch the bottom seal together. This really doesn't matter, and honestly, pinching is not that effective, but it doesn't matter because the towel will hold it together and will help it fuse together while it's cold proofing in the fridge. Fold the towel over the dough, then tuck the whole bundle into a bag. You can use produce bags from the grocery store, or you can use a very large Ziploc bag. This is a 2-gallon zip top bag. Place your bundle in the fridge, ideally for 24 hours, though you can get away with less if necessary. I find 36 hours to 48 hours to be the real sweet spot between creating that nice sour tang and giving the dough that light, airy crumb. Turn the dough out onto a sheet of parchment paper and score it as you wish. I am not a skilled scorer and have never done anything more than one simple slash across the surface of the dough. Bake your loaf at 450 degrees in a covered Dutch oven for 30 minutes. This Dutch oven has been preheating for roughly 45 minutes. After the 30 minutes, uncover the Dutch oven, lower the oven temperature to 400 degrees, and return the pan to the oven for another 10 to 15 minutes or until the loaf is browned to your liking. Don't be afraid to keep the loaf in the oven until you really get that caramelized crust that you're looking for. Remove your loaf from the Dutch oven and let it cool for at least 30 minutes before slicing. As you can see, this has a nice blistered golden brown crust with a good ear and an undercarriage that is crisp but not burnt. I will link to this bread knife in the notes. It's so important to have a sharp serrated knife when cutting sourdough. This one is not that expensive. It's not that pretty either, but it gets the job done. As you can see, this has a nice open crumb and the olives are pretty evenly dispersed. You can never get them, completely uniformly distributed, but I find this method works really well to get the olives incorporated as evenly as possible. As I noted earlier, I get questions all the time about other combinations like jalapeños and cheddar or dried fruit and nuts, and you can use this same method for whatever inclusions your heart desires. It may take some trial and error to get the quantities of the inclusions right, but in general, I would say err on the side of less is more. This is another olive loaf I did earlier this week. I'm really loving this rosemary-olive combination. As always, let me know if you have any questions.